My name is Alexander. I never thought I'd say these words, but I suppose I learned to become someone else after what happened. I can't say I was the perfect husband. After all, no one is. I worked a lot, often missing dinners because I was focused on providing for us. But I was always honest with my wife, loyal, and devoted to her. I loved her like I've loved no one else in my life. Her name was Kenia, and perhaps that is one of the most beautiful names I've ever heard. We met back in university, a student love that later turned into a serious relationship, then marriage. I was sure of my choice. It seemed like we had everything we needed for happiness. A cozy home, common interests, a reserved but strong attachment. But life, as it often does, is never simple, and everything that seemed stable and unshakable slowly began to crumble. It started with small things. Senia began staying late at work more often. Too many tasks, she said. I knew she was ambitious, always trying to do everything perfectly. That's one of the reasons I always admired her. But something in her behavior started to change. She became distant, withdrawn. I noticed how she would sometimes avert her gaze when I spoke, as if she was trying to hide something from me. I could have ignored it, but I didn't. One evening, when she came home late as usual, I saw her trying to hide her phone. She immediately took it and ran into the bathroom without explaining why. I didn't ask any questions, but something inside me clicked. My intuition, I've always trusted it, told me something was wrong. I began watching her. I was desperate. It wasn't mere curiosity or suspicion anymore. It was as though the desperation was taking over, and I couldn't ignore it. I had never been a jealous person, and this was not the situation I had ever imagined I'd find myself in. But I couldn't escape it. One night, when Senia was asleep, I took her phone. I knew it was wrong, but nothing could stop me. And what I found shattered me. There was a conversation, not just a friendly chat, but passionate messages. She was talking to someone, a man, someone she had been meeting with for the past few months, beyond our life. Her words were full of desire, promises. You are my only desire. I miss your lips. Your touch, I read, feeling each word like a knife to my heart. I couldn't hide it anymore. I knew. But worse than that, I didn't know why. What had I done wrong? Why? I tried to be a good husband, supported her in everything she did, loved her. But now I was left with this emptiness, this betrayal. Every day I tried to return to normal life. I didn't talk to her about it. No, I couldn't. I waited. I waited for her to admit it, but she never did. Every time she came home, it was as if nothing had changed. She smiled, talked about her day, but it felt like we were living in two different worlds. I knew I had to make a decision. I wasn't sure I could take revenge. But I knew one thing. I wouldn't just forgive her. I couldn't. I didn't want to be the person who forgave and moved on. That wasn't me. Revenge, though, wasn't the same as hurting her for the sake of it. No, revenge for me was about taking back some control over the situation. She had destroyed us, but I would show her that I wasn't powerless. I started manipulating situations. I knew she often disappeared, meeting him. So I created scenarios, putting pressure on her, getting her to return home later than planned. I pretended everything was fine, but inside I knew this was my way of getting back at her. One day I set up a meeting I had carefully planned. I invited her lover. He didn't know who I was, but he knew I was the friend who had suspected what was going on between them. I made sure everything would be exposed in front of her. And when she came home and saw us together, her face turned pale. Did you know, I asked, standing in the doorway, did you know I knew everything? Her eyes were empty. There was no regret, no apology. She just stood there silent. But I couldn't stop. I had to say everything. I told her how I had been watching her for months, how my heart had broken each day, how I had tried to understand what was happening. And when I had said everything I needed to, she knew. She knew it was over. The next few days, Cassini and I barely spoke. She stayed home, but it was like she wasn't really there. We didn't talk about it. She left for work late, came back even later, but I didn't ask questions. I understood that our life was no longer the same, and this wasn't just the end of a relationship. It was the end of who we were to each other. I couldn't go back to what we had. I couldn't return to that naivety where everything was okay. She tried to apologize, but I brushed her off. She had to understand that there were no apologies that could fix what was broken. What had happened wasn't just a mistake. It was a betrayal that had changed everything. One day she said she wanted to leave. She couldn't live in this atmosphere where we had become strangers. But I didn't try to stop her. She could leave if she wanted to. I knew I couldn't forgive her, that I couldn't make myself believe in our love anymore. I stopped believing in it, but revenge wasn't about making her suffer. I wanted to show her that I could live without her lies, without her deceit. I wanted her to realize that she hadn't just lost me, but herself, and that was a far greater loss. As strange as it sounds, I understood that revenge wasn't about destroying her life. It was about living my life without her. And perhaps that was the most powerful response to everything she had done. When she left, I finally understood. It didn't matter what had been between us or who did what. I was alone, but I was free, and that was my true liberation. Weeks passed and I heard rumors about Xenia. She was changing. People said she had become distant, withdrawn. She started avoiding her old friends, and at work they said she was struggling. She had lost her job, though the reasons were unclear. Some said she had a difficult personality, others that she just couldn't handle the pressure. I didn't follow her life, but sometimes I would hear bits and pieces, and one day I happened to run into her. She was standing by the entrance of a cafe, nervously looking around. When she saw me, her face turned pale, and I could see her freeze. We hadn't seen each other since she left, and honestly, I didn't know what to expect. She looked different. There was something about her, something broken. I approached her, and she tried to smile, but it was a weak attempt. "Hello," she said, her voice tight. "You okay?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She hesitated. I don't know what happened. Everything's been so strange. I can't understand how I got here." I stood there watching her. She seemed lost, not just from what had happened with us, but in life. I could see it in her eyes. She was no longer the confident woman I had once known. "Are you alone?" I asked, my curiosity growing. We both knew the answer to that. She paused, then nodded. "Yes, alone. He left. He wasn't what I thought. I was wrong." Her eyes flickered with something, not regret for what she had done to me, but regret for what had happened to her. She had made the wrong choice, and now she was alone. The man she thought would be her salvation was just another disappointment. I felt a stir inside me. I could have said, "I told you so." I could have laid my pain bare for her to see, but I didn't. I wasn't that person anymore. She needed to understand on her own that the path she chose led only to emptiness. "You want to go back?" I asked, unable to stop myself. She went silent, her face contorting as she fought with herself. She wanted to explain, but the words wouldn't come. And I realized that she didn't even know how to explain it. How to explain that she had destroyed herself by destroying us. Weeks passed, and I heard more about Xenia's life. She lost her job. She was isolated. Friends drifted away. She tried to rebuild herself, but the cracks were too deep. No matter how much she tried to pretend everything was fine, her past actions had left scars. She was no longer the woman I had once known. She was someone who had lost her way, and there was no coming back from it. She tried to contact me again, but I no longer cared. She was free to rebuild her life, but that life no longer included me. I was done. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't vengeful. I had moved on. I understood that sometimes the best revenge is simply to live well and to walk away from the chaos someone else created. 2 years passed. I built a new life. It wasn't without pain, but it was mine. I had learned to be independent, to put myself first. And in doing so, I discovered a freedom I had never known before. As for Xenia, I heard bits and pieces about her. She tried to start over, but the damage she had done to herself could never be undone. I had let her go, and in doing so, I had freed myself. And in the end, that was my revenge. Not making her suffer, but showing her that I could be happy without her. I had reclaimed my life, and that was all I needed.